I'm delighted to have an opportunity to share some of my life experience and maybe inspire others to you know, walk outside of their comfort zone, because that's the most rewarding work that we can do.
Yeah. When you were 18, which was around 1963, you helped to organize your local chapter of Congress of Racial Equality, or CORE. You asked your chapter leader, Dr. James Farmer, to ask Dr. Martin Luther King to come to your town. What inspired you to make that request?
Well, I was working with a handful of people. We were working, civil rights in the North was focused on housing issues, the fact that there was de facto segregation, and that landlords were, we called them slumlords at the time, because they were simply not repairing the buildings. They were collecting rent, and the buildings were in terrible disrepair, specifically in communities of color and low income. But it was a real racial issue. It was, as I said, de facto segregation. But there were only, a few dozen people in the city of Bridgeport, Connecticut, where I was living. And Bridgeport had a very large population, and particularly people that were vulnerable to these terrible housing conditions. And we just couldn't get the work done with the few people we had. And we had the idea to invite Dr. King to Bridgeport. And when he came, we filled the largest church in Bridgeport. I think there were 600 people packed into that church. And after that, we had a very strong chapter, and we were very effective.
Wow.
So it was and by the way, back in those days, we didn't have cell phones, and we didn't have computers. The way I wrote to Dr. Farmer to ask him to invite Dr. King to come to Bridgeport was on a manual typewriter,
Whoa.
where and then you take the paper out and you fold it up and put it in the mail and hope it gets there. And then we did have phone numbers to follow up and make those arrangements. So it took a very small chapter that was too small to be effective, and it allowed us to become very well organized and very effective. I was asked to go to Washington to lobby for the passing of the Civil Rights Bill. And I did that first in uh, in the House of Representatives, and we went to all of the we visited all of the elected officials from Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, mainly from the North. And then when it was time to debate the bill on the floor of Congress, we were up in the in the gallery watching the debate. And literally, the Southern Democrats would point to us and call us nigger and nigger lover and slander out of the halls of Congress. And here I am, 18 years old, and just figuring out what life, grown up life, is all about, and watching that. And then every evening, we were hosted by African American families in Washington, D.C. And there would be warmth and joy and good food and a sense of camaraderie, and feeling in a space of love in the evening. And then going back to Congress the next day and having this hatred and bigotry hurled at us. I also had the privilege of hearing Dr. King speak at the March on Washington for Jobs and Justice. I went on a bus with the members of Bridgeport Corps. And at one point I kind of worked my way. I left my group, but I had written down the bus numbers in case I couldn't find them in a crowd of, I think it was 250,000 people. And I worked my way up as close as I could get to the stage when Dr. King gave his I Have a Dream speech. And it just washed over me and really inspired me for the rest of my life.
That's amazing. I can't imagine what it would be like to be there during an actual piece of history, watching Dr. Martin Luther King give that incredible speech that has gotten quoted in like thousands of history books. It just amazing.
It was amazing. We were again in the gallery watching the vote count. And when the vote passed, we all went back to the organizing office and we sang We Shall Overcome. We linked arms, as was the tradition at the time. You held the hand of the person next to you and crossed your arms and held the hands of the people on either side. And we sang We Shall Overcome. And in that room were all the great civil rights leaders of the time, except for Dr. King, who was in Florida desegregating a luncheonette. And he came out of the luncheonette and they told him the news, and he made a peace sign and answered the reporters' questions. Sometime in my 50s, somebody said, "Manna, how'd you get like this?" And I hadn't thought about it. I just do what I do, as you do, and others who care. And I thought back and I realized that those two events, being present for Dr. King's speech and being present the day the Civil Rights Bill passed in the Senate, and we knew that Lyndon Johnson would sign it, and going back to the office and being present at that moment with all of those inspired and inspiring people, gave me a lot of courage and a lot of determination for the various causes and issues I've worked on during my life.
We live in a world currently where there is division and there is darkness and there is just a lot of things wrong. And how do young people like me keep inspired and keep up the hard work and the courage?
Well, I just always ask myself, what's the next right thing? And in my mind, I often ask, what would Martin do? What would Dr. King do? I often ask, what would Pete Seeger do? Because he was one of the people who also inspired me when I was young. And I do the next right thing, whatever it is I can think of. I think the one thing we have to be careful about is becoming overwhelmed or disempowered.
And what do you think the next right thing is for 2021?
Ah, we're in a mess, but
Yes, we
in
are.
terms, one of the things to do is to do diversity work, take those trainings, really understand and be self-reflective, and understand. For example, somebody called me on something that I said, and they said, that is, you might not realize it, but that's a microaggression. And I was shocked, because I'm a veteran of the civil rights movement and I deeply believe in equality, but I'm also a veteran of this culture. And I had to think back and say, how could somebody see that in what I said? And so I'll think twice about how I phrase things. I think somehow I've just come from a memorial service from someone who radiated joy and radiated kindness and trust. And I think if we can cultivate that and be able to start to have the conversations that change people's hearts, I trust that Congress is going to sort this out. In the end, that order will be restored under the new administration, and our work is in our communities and working together to figure out how to call a problem and not let it hide, and not assume that things are getting better because they're quiet. I think there's a lot of work to be done. And for the other thing I would recommend is figure out what resonates for you. For me, when I was a teenager, a call for social justice just really resonated. It infuriated me to think that it was otherwise. And so I joined up with other people who agreed, and we found ways to be effective. And we also made some mistakes and realized what wasn't an effective use of time or resources. But it's important to, it might be climate change, it might be social justice, it might be, my son and daughter-in-law foster dogs that need temporary homes until they're permanently placed. Whatever it is that you can do that will contribute positively to your family, to your community, and to the world. And it helps to be able to identify that, because you'll be more motivated if it's something that really matters to you.
Great. I will definitely keep that in mind, keep that in my brain. I'm so glad that I was able to speak with you today. This reminder, any reminder helps in this current climate, in this current time. Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, my great pleasure. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I appreciate you, and I really want to acknowledge your courage and leadership. And I look forward to great things from you, Maitreya. And if I can help in any way, please let me know.
Thank you so much. Okay.
Stay well.
You too. Stay healthy. Stay well.
I will. And keep making good trouble.
Yes, definitely.